Thank you very much. Tēnā koutou katoa. Hello, welcome to everyone. What an honor to be doing a keynote. It is the absolute best spot because I can enjoy everything else. I no longer have to work on my slides. Um, People think that I do all my slides in the last day, and it's kind of true, but it's also not true. There's lots of work that goes into it, months of thinking about it. But yes, it's not all on the last day, I promise. So yeah, my name's Jeremy. I'm going to talk to you about hardware security keys. I generally come up with the title first. So I thought this is a clever title, clever in a silly, punny way, so that kind of thing. Hardware security keys, where are they? And so basically, it's not going to work. That's not going to work. There they are. Okay, talk done. Today I got, well, this is like, we were sort of led to believe 10 years ago when these things were, came out that our keychains would be like jam-packed full of these keys. And I started collecting them mainly because I was, just interested in how they worked and things. And I've really got too many, this is like, in reality, this is what you call too many keys. In fact, just two is enough really. The way these keys work, you don't need a key per service. You can have one key for many things. And there's not only YubiKeys as the sellotape of hardware keys, but there's many different types there. We've got some Phaeton-made ones with biometrics. We've got some solo keys, which is like open hardware things. USB Armory, which is like Linux on a stick, which you can, I think, put a hardware key on. I haven't been brave enough to do that yet. And then, so it's not all my keys. That was actually photoshopped in. I lost it while preparing for this talk. 5 years it had been like rolling around my bag, and then I'm like preparing this talk and I lost it. But then the day before I did a practice on it, I found it again. So it's actually back on my keychain. I couldn't be bothered updating the slides, sorry about that. The joke was too good for it. Some keen eyes will spot there's actually some dongles in there, not actually hardware keys, You got to go from little cat A to little cat C sometimes. So, but they kind of come with me as well. So, yeah. Really, what are these keys? This is the inside of one of the YubiKey keys. There's really not much to it. There's this, PCB, there's a chip, and an LED, which I think fell off while this person was undoing it. But really, that's what it is. Microcontroller connected to USB, and that's what you're plugging in. So the microcontroller is doing some clever maths things, and really that's what you've got. But really, in reality, there's something you have, right? Our multi-factor authentication, security awareness training, kicking in. There is something you have, and they're a really good thing that you have, because you can prove that you have them over the internet, right? And so that's one of the nice things. But also, they're all kind of something as well, because you can have a PIN on them, and PIN is a terrible name because it's not 6 digits or 4 digits. You can have longer alphanumeric characters in these. It's more that the device itself is verifying the PIN. It's not being sent over the network. And then some of them even have biometrics. So really, it's like a who's who of factors of authentication, and that's why they're so interesting and useful in a security sense. But I want to start off with a story about Estonia, because as I was researching this talk, I came across Estonia, and essentially 20 years ago, they created this, national PKI identity smart card system, and 99% of the population use it. Smart cards like these, and they're kind of mandatory, so I suppose that explains why most people use it. They've gone to the point where they're saying, well, like, if you don't have one, we're going to roll out services that we're pretty sure we're not discriminating against anybody, by rolling out a service that depends on having this card. And that's not to say everyone's got a USB card reader and a laptop and whatever, but you can have the card and you can go to the government office or the library or wherever, and you'll be able to prove your identity with your card. And the history of these is quite fascinating. After Estonia had regained its independence from the Soviet Union in the 90s, they kind of had to catch up a bit and rebuild some of their technology infrastructure from scratch. And they poured a bunch of money into IT, maybe to be a little bit better than the West, like, hey, we got this, we can do this cool stuff. They had like like a lot of enthusiasm, and they also had some political support and the technological know-how to kind of right place, right time to really build something neat. And the government and their Police and Border Guard Board, PPA, looked to alternative source of truth for identity. They thought, well, we've got passports, but that we don't want that to be our proof of identity, because not everyone will have a passport. And we've got driver's licenses, but that's really, I can drive a car. That's not really my proof of identity. And not everyone's going to want to drive cars. So they're quite really forward-looking from that sense as well. And in other countries, you've got your bank as well as maybe a source of identity. I know I've had to use my bank statement to prove my identity a couple of times. And they said, well, we don't want to rely on the banks either as like identity provider for our country. So they really wanted to build their own, system. And so they rolled out these cards in 2002. They packaged drivers, hundreds of thousands of card readers, partially paid by the government, partially paid by the banks and the telcos who were like the main beneficiaries at the time. So you can do your online banking and things, apply for a loan from home, I suppose, and partially paid for by the people as well. So I think they got to the point where even if you bought like a Dell in Estonia, they would all come with card readers in them. It was just like something that got normalized and was very, very like widespread, and they just really went for it. They decided to do it, and then they did it. Even voting, they were the first country to offer internet voting, 2005. Their local elections, 10,000 people voted that first year, and then a couple of years later, they had 30,000 people vote, which is about 5% of the votes. And then 2011, there were 140,000 people voting, and their most recent election, 247,000 people voted online, and that was like 50% of the vote. So that's pretty awesome if you think about, how it did not overnight, but the real use of these cards is really coming into its own. Now they're like this huge, they're like, oh, we're the most digital country, we've got all these great services, and it supposedly saves them heaps of money because they can now, cut out all of this bureaucracy and paperwork, and they can vote. Even it's the same cards that they'll use to vote in their their politicians will use to vote with the same one that people can amongst themselves prove their identity. However, there were some problems. In 2012, they recalled their cards and they said, oh yes, everything's fine. Cards are secure, in case you were wondering. But if you could just pop on down to the PPA, we'll just reissue your card for you. In reality, an internal pen test had discovered that there was a PIN bypass bug, right? So you could send the right sequence of commands to the card, and it would basically no longer need a PIN to authenticate the signature. So that's not great, because they were using these as a multi-factor authentication for their citizens, right? And so having the PIN was a big part of that. And so they asked people to come in and reissue them. Now, reissuing wasn't a new piece of plastic. It was, reprogramming the Java applet on these things. So you come in, you plug it in, you reprogram it. Years later, in 2018, a security researcher at the University of Tartu, they kind of analyzed the publicly available certificates. I think you can just download everyone's public certificate on this, or I don't know how they got access to them. But they went through all these public certificates, and they found 10 pairs of public keys that were the same, right? Which is very unusual, most unusual, given that they were supposed to be generated on the cards, right? These keys. And so how if you have the same public key, stands to reason, I suppose mathematically there's a chance, but they're going to have the same private key. And how can this even happen? So they discovered with some neat fingerprinting techniques, some RSA fingerprinting techniques, that they could prove that all the cards from 2012 to 2017 were actually generated outside of the card, loaded over the internet and onto the cards. Not so great. Allegedly, they did this to speed up key generation, because it took like 5 minutes to generate the key on the cards, because there's not much processing power on them. And that was fine when they're in the factory being made. But when they asked everyone to come into the office to reissue their cards, they can't have someone sitting there for 5 minutes waiting for the keys to regenerate, right? So they said, oh, it's got to be faster than that. And then the company making them was like, all right, let's go. And they just didn't really communicate properly what that was going to mean. Because the security researcher was surprised to find out that the government didn't know that their keys were being generated off card for the last 5 years. Um, so yeah, they ended up reissuing cards again. However, there was also the RSA vulnerability, the Infineon RSA vulnerability, where the private keys could be inferred from your public keys. Also not great, so they ended up having to reissue again 750,000 cards. But this one went a lot smoother. They'd already had their practice, and people just popped down again and, got a new card, and it actually ended up being not too much of an issue. The state sued the manufacturer for like 150 million euros. They ended up settling like a couple of years, last year, I think, 2.2 million euros. So these days they're made by a different company, and there's a bit more standardized. They were doing things a little bit fly by night before, but now they're a bit more standardized. So much so that I found a blog where someone was using their identity card for their SSH key, right? So they were like, hey, I've got this card, and I can now use it as my SSH thing because it's a standard smart card. And the same company that's manufacturing now just recently won a contract to take over the reissuing process as well. So I think you can just eventually be able to pop on down to the supermarket and get your national identity reissued in 50 shopping centres across Estonia. So they haven't always had those cards. They've also had mobile ID, which they ended up having a SIM card, be able to do these, your proof of identity, and later an app as well. There were a few issues there, like there's a phishing scam where people were being asked, go to a website. It's like, okay, hey, plug in your card and enter your PIN and enter your secondary PIN. There's like one for managing the card. And then what the scammer would do is be able to register you for the mobile ID if you hadn't done so already. So they kind of enroll you in the mobile ID, and then they would be able to use your identity, which is pretty crazy if you think about, like, I'm still surprised when people have the proxy capturing your TOTP token being like, oh, this is an advanced phishing scam. Well, this is next level advanced phishing scam. But it was still successful. And I want to go on a little bit of a tangent about the 2013 local elections, because I started digging, and then I found this YouTube channel, which I had checked before, is still up, at 20 subscribers, is Comedy Gold. Because, okay, so they did this whole transparency thing where they were like, you know what, we're going to show you how we do everything, we're going to film everything. But right from like taking the servers, installing them, booting and installing Debian, and then running their scripts and things, it was all filmed, which, if you think about it, is fantastic from a, hey, we want to be transparent, we're trying to show you guys that we're doing the right thing. And so they filmed it all, and it's really, really funny because, they're like live on screen trying to do all commands, and I don't speak Estonian, but I understood everything they were saying, because they're like, is it dollar? No, back, it's like it's open bracket, I mean, they could have written a script for this, They were actually proponents of many, like, all this open source software as well. They were being like, all the stuff was open source and trying to be as transparent as possible. But I could have written a script for this and made the script open source, I think. Another thing as part of these videos is the workers, as part of testing it, revealed their own personal PIN for one of their cards. That's not so great, but you can change it, so I think that's okay. Maybe they change it straight away. I hope so. There was also the desktop that they used to compile the client that they would ship to all of their citizens to say, here's how you vote online, run this exe. Was built on this random desktop, and it's okay, maybe it's like, then there was like pokerstars.ee link, and you're like, well, I mean, this was 2013, this could have been Jenkins or something, surely. But still they're trying their best. Maybe this is how their images came out of there. Maybe they had PokerStars as a default thing, I don't know. But remember, this is the election, right? It's not like this is the software you're giving to your So then there was the Wi-Fi password on the wall. Now that one I can understand, like hey, you've got a war room, you've got an incident, like that makes total sense. You can put your credentials on the wall. Maybe it's just internet access. You don't want someone standing around being like, oh, how do I get access to the internet, right? That makes sense. But then the camera is there, and that doesn't. The problem was they were like posting these videos as the election was ongoing. So yeah, I don't know. And then there was this one, which is like my personal favorite. Hopefully this works. So his camera's like, oh, route. Oh yes, something's happening now. Let's pan over. Oh yes, there's this guy. He's what's he gonna do? He's got his piece of paper, right? He's got to double check. That's what he's gonna do later on for lunch, surely. Yep. Okay, nothing. And then he's gonna the camera. Oh yes, he's typing something. Let's check. Let's capture all of this on camera. Oh, there it is. Oh, and he's got some symbols and numbers and uppercase. That's great. And then he's gone, okay, enter, and then you can see enter, and then no mistaking, that was his root password to this box that and you know, remember posted while the election was ongoing, right? So yeah, and now you got the Wi-Fi password. Yeah. So I had these in case that didn't work. Like, as funny as this is, and I had a good chuckle, but it's and 10 years later, like, hey, it's a real shame because these videos were used as kind of propaganda against internet voting is a really bad idea, and they're like, oh, look how insecure it is, and it's like, yeah, okay, they were flying by the seat of their parliament for sure, you know, but like what you missed was like that they had this multi-factor authentication hardware key for all their citizens, this really strong sense of identity. That part was already, that part was there, and they were just, maybe they should have had a better way to count the votes, but people, a citizen could actually vote and then verify their vote cryptographically with their own little smart card. So if you're, these articles saying, oh yeah, this is why internet voting is a bad idea, it's like, yes, there's some things to sort out, but if you don't have a good identity system, you can't even begin to do internet voting. So I think they missed the point, which is a bit sad. So yeah, Estonia had this great card, something something you have, and this is 20 years ago. They also added value to the user and not just the government. The people have bought into it so much, if you couldn't use it for anything other than just voting, right? Because actually you could use these cards for lots and lots of things, like voting, banking, parking tickets, health, schools, prescriptions. Like it started gaining traction and people started using it. And not just with government services, even, just amongst citizens, they really gave tools to their citizens to prove identity amongst themselves. So you can imagine, you started a new job, you could sign your contract with your card, send it to your employer, and they would know what that means. Like, oh, I got the signature, I can verify it, sweet. How many of us have just turned up to the job on the right day and agreed to our name? Come and sit over here. You, Jeremy? Yeah, okay. We're waiting for you. Here's your admin access. Would be nice to have, just double check. The other thing that they got right, these cards became common knowledge. Everyone knew how to use them. They weren't too hard. Anytime someone's going to say, oh, my users can't understand hardware keys, this stuff's too hard for them, like, it's not too hard. You're hiring intelligent people, and then you're treating them like they don't know anything. So, these things don't have to be too hard. It is tricky. You do need to think about the messaging that you're going to have and the communications, and that's a huge part of it. And it might take some time, but you can get people on board. So actually, I signed a document to join a new employer recently, and I thought, hey, I've got all these keys. Maybe I can use that to sign my document. And I tried. So SSH can do this. I don't know if you knew, but SSH can sign just a random file. So I had a hardware key signature, and so the keys on my hardware key, I can sign a file. It all just works. And then is into my passphrase, great. And then signed it. I created this signature thing, which basically ends up being this file with your signature. And so I shipped that along with my contract. Yep, I've signed it to my employer. And I said, oh, by the way, grab my keys from GitHub, so you can verify that maybe I own that GitHub account. And then here's your remote code execution and email. Just run this thing, it'll be fine. I don't know how many people. I've done this a couple of times now. I've never actually got a reply, so I'm assuming they liked it or like, ooh, look at that, or just didn't know what to do with it, right? How is this the most usable way I can do this, right? I didn't even go to GPG or My employer, we haven't had a key party yet, so they don't know what my public key is going to be. So it's a real problem, right? So I think there could be a better way to do this. So I think 3 common challenges for rolling out hardware keys in your organization, right? They're too expensive. And one of the klaxon QI, they're too expensive. Well, it depends, really. They are expensive after a large incident. That's right. And really my question is, what sized event will it take for it to be not expensive? And why does that really matter? Well, these hardware keys are phishing resistant. Yeah, I know. So actually, this morning I was on NZ Info. I love this community because I was a lot of NZ InfoSec Slack channel, and I was like, does anyone have a through-hole resistor? And could you help me with a photo? So yeah, Spronky came through. Amazing photo. One of my favorite pictures at the moment. So how are they phishing resistant? It's that the key, your browser takes the domain and gives it to the hardware key, and that's incorporated in the signature. So really the human is taken out of the equation. I don't have to verify the domain myself, because if the domain's not absolutely correct, the same one that I signed up for, then it's going to come back and say, doesn't work, signature doesn't match. So that's why they're great for phishing resistance. So I'm not saying, hardware keys are always cheaper in your organization, but if you went and looked and you did some, cost analysis of like, well, what size breach would we start rolling this stuff out, and how much is that going to cost us, and how much were these keys again? Like $50? Oh, okay. I'm not saying that's always going to be cheaper, but if it is cheaper in your organization, maybe it's time to look at hardware keys. If it's not cheaper, then hey, you're okay for a while. You do need to do some creative security accounting to make that one work. The problem is you're talking with 2 budgets that don't normally interact with each other, but classic Google's Darren Bilby at QuakeCon earlier this year mentioned that hardware security keys were like probably the best investment they ever made in security. And recently Dropbox had an incident where they lost their GitHub repositories, and as a result they are speeding up their rollout of WebAuthn hardware tokens for everybody. So you got to thinking about, okay, what size event would it take for it to be not so expensive anymore? Lost keys, right? And Darren also gave a great example of this. It's okay, you go to GitHub and you say, hey GitHub, I got this key here. Next time you see me, I got to have this key with me. And GitHub's like, are you sure? It's like, yep, this key, this exact one, I can prove it cryptographically. Okay, here's your recovery codes. Ooh, what do I do with these? How do I? Well, okay, I'll no. Saving these down will be insecure. I'll just not keep them anywhere. Okay. I'm fine. I'll be cool. The next day, GitHub, you're not going to believe it. You won't believe I lost that key, and GitHub's going to turn around and say, sorry, Jeremy who? Your account will be very safe. But GitHub actually does have some recovery options where if you still had access to your SSH key, you could use that. So if you had your SSH key and your password, there's some recovery channel there. And I think you need to open a ticket, but there's some API endpoint which you can hit with your SSH key. So there's you got to look into the stuff before you get going. And those that recovery keys, you better put that in a good place. But be kind to yourself. Don't force yourself to put it somewhere ultra secure right there and then, because chances are you're going to not make a good security decision. Like in your password manager, it might be fine for a while, right? Just copy them down, put them somewhere, you put the other safe stuff. Maybe a password manager is a great place. And then later on, you can start thinking about your threat model and, I've got them in my password manager. Maybe I could put them somewhere else, but at least you've got them, right? Yeah. So some organizations are even more switched on, and they make these keys as accessible as possible, right? So they'll have a website where you can just order more keys, and it's no big deal. You don't even need to expense it or anything. It's like, how many keys you need? I'll just order some more. And then people can sort themselves out, right? So really, people can just have more than one, and that's a great solution to the problem. Or just think about it in advance. And from all the companies I've talked to, the actual percentage of lost keys is very low. It hardly ever happens. Some companies are like, I can't even remember, if we've had a lost key or not. So it doesn't happen as much as you think. I would suggest maybe dealing with it when it actually happens. Like, gee, Jeremy always loses his key on Monday morning, and then he can't work for a whole day. Something's suspicious going on there, but the user experience is bad. This is another one I've heard a lot. And I would say, compared to what, right? Is that compared to a single factor? Of course it's going to be bad compared to a single factor. But you're not putting this in place because you want, single factor authentication. Is it compared to push notifications? And so you're like, well, okay, during an incident where someone is being sent push notifications up one after the other and saying, hey, they get an email from IT saying, we're having the worst day. Could you imagine? Can you just hit yes on that thing and it'll all stop, And now this person needs to make that choice. Well, it wasn't our IT email, but they said they're having a really bad day. So maybe I'll just push yes. Okay, cool. And that happens, right? That exact scenario happens. High-profile breaches happen that way. So are you letting your users have their experience in that case? Is that a good experience? Or are you just taking it out entirely and the user, doesn't even need to make that decision because their hardware key is just not even going to work in that case, right? The other thing to remember is we're not protecting against current or past threats. We want to be preparing for future threats, right? This is the asteroid that we collided into recently. So it's you're not telling people that, for all these years you've been bad by just having your password and your TOTP, and what we really needed was a super secure shiny thing, and all this time we've been bad at it. It's not true, right? But what we're doing is we're changing to the current landscape, and we're finding more and more, that the TOTP aren't cutting it and the push notifications aren't cutting it. So really what you're trying to you should be thinking about is, in the future, what kind of threats are we going to have? And is my organization prepared for those threats? So yeah, someone having to decide on the day is not a great experience. And, that's probably going to happen a lot more. So in conclusion, I think successful hardware keys, they have broad support from the company. Not just technical, not just someone wanting to do something cool, also from, the whole part of the company, from the execs down. They may not know the technical details, but they know why they're doing it. They add value to the user, not just to the security team. So start thinking about other ways you can add value. Like, I've got my hardware key set up to when I unplug it from my MacBook, it locks the screen, right? I didn't know, but that was actually a standard feature in Mac OS I could do. So now it's quite nice. I've now enabled a nice feature for myself. I can take my key out and it locks, Thinking about adding value to the user beyond just, it's a security thing you need to do. They're common knowledge. You need to think about how you're going to message them for people, how you're going to tell people about them, bring everybody along on that journey, and be thinking about future threats, and that might require your creative security accounting to convince somebody of that, hey, what's the opportunity cost if we don't go after these security keys? So yeah, thank you very much. Thank you to these people, and I also have a bunch of links if you're interested. I'm sure I can get these slides out somehow if you're interested in some of the podcasts and YouTube videos and things that I had referenced. But thank you very much.